The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and silence. She stood there frozen, her designer heels sinking slightly into the polished floor as her billionaire husband cradled a newborn baby in his arms. Not hers. The child slept peacefully against his chest. The woman beside him, young, nervous, possessive, tightened her grip on his sleeve. For a moment, time stopped. No screams, no questions, no tears, just the slow, unbearable realization spreading across her face. Her husband looked up and met her eyes. Panic flickered. Guilt followed. She said nothing. She simply turned around and walked away. What he didn't know, what no one in that hospital knew, was that everything he had built, everything he owned, was standing on ground she controlled. Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and your local time. And if you enjoy deep emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Before she became the billionaire's wife, before cameras and charity galas and whispered envy followed her steps, Amara Okoye was simply a girl who learned early that survival demanded discipline. She grew up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Lagos, where electricity came and went without apology, and ambition was often dismissed as arrogance. Her father died when she was 16. Her mother sold fabrics in the open market, waking before dawn, returning home with tired feet and quiet pride. Amara watched everything. She learned how money moved, how trust could disappear faster than cash, how women were expected to endure silently. At university, while others chased social validation, Amara studied numbers like a language of power, accounting, business law, corporate structures. She worked nights tutoring classmates who underestimated her until exam results humbled them. She saved every naira. She invested early, small, careful, patient. By 26, she owned stakes in 2 logistics startups. By 28, she understood something most people never did control. Was not about visibility. It was about structure. That was when she met Darius Kalichi. He was charismatic, tall, magnetic in rooms where men competed for attention. He spoke of vision and legacy, of building something Africa had never seen. He had hunger in his eyes, the kind that could either change a life or consume it. They met at a business networking event in Abuja. Darius was pitching an ambitious infrastructure idea, but his numbers were weak. His projections optimistic, almost reckless. After the session, Amara approached him quietly. "You need better financial modeling," she said, calm, precise. "Your idea is good, but your foundation is fragile. Most men would have bristled." Darius didn't. He smiled. "Then help me strengthen it." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. Amara didn't fall in love with his charm. She fell in love with his willingness to listen. Darius didn't fall in love with her beauty, though it was undeniable, but with her clarity. She saw through illusions. She challenged him without humiliating him. Their relationship grew alongside the company. When banks hesitated, Amara structured alternative funding. When investors demanded control, she negotiated terms that protected long-term ownership. Quietly, carefully, she put assets under holding companies' trusts, layered protections. Darius trusted her completely. "Just handle it," he would say. "You're better at this than I am." And she did. When they married, it was celebrated as a fairy tale. Newspapers called her the woman who tamed the billionaire. She smiled politely for photos wearing elegance like armor. What no one reported was that she stopped appearing in boardrooms the day she became a wife. Not because she was forced, because she chose to. "I want us to have peace," she told Darius. "Let the world see one leader. I'll support you from behind." He protested at first. "You don't have to disappear." "I'm not disappearing," she replied gently. "I'm repositioning." Marriage softened him. Success hardened him. As the company grew, so did Darius's presence in the media. He became a symbol. African excellence, male dominance ambition, fulfilled. People praised his brilliance. Women admired him openly. Men envied him quietly. Amara watched the transformation with careful eyes. At home, she remained the same warm, attentive, supportive. She hosted dinners, remembered names, sent handwritten thank you notes to partners' wives. She listened when Darius vented. She reassured him when pressure tightened his voice. But something subtle began to shift. He stopped asking her opinion. At first it was small. A decision made without consultation. A contract signed hastily. A board meeting she wasn't informed about. "You trust me, right?" he said once lightly when she raised a concern. "I do," she answered. "That's why I'm asking." He kissed her forehead. "Relax, I've got this." That sentence appeared more often than it should have. At social events, people spoke about her instead of to her. "You're so lucky," they said. "Your husband is a genius." She smiled. At night alone in her private study, Amara reviewed documents she still had access to. Ownership structures, share distributions, voting rights. She hadn't touched them in years, but they remained intact. She wasn't suspicious yet. She was patient. But patience did not mean blindness. She noticed how Darius started staying out late, how his phone angled away when messages came in, how he grew irritated when she asked simple questions. "You're overthinking," he said once, sharper than usual. "Why can't you just enjoy the life we've built?" The irony cut deep. We, she thought, we built this. Yet she said nothing. Amara believed marriage was not a battlefield, it was a covenant. And covenants deserved grace before judgment. What she didn't know was that while she was protecting peace, someone else was studying weakness. While she was preserving silence, someone else was whispering desire. And while she trusted love to anchor loyalty, pride was quietly rewriting the rules of her marriage. Still on the surface, everything looked perfect. The house, the lifestyle, the legacy. But foundations don't crack loudly. They crack slowly, silently, and when they finally break, they take everything built on them with ruthless precision. There are secrets born from fear, and there are secrets born from wisdom. Amara's secret belonged to the second kind. Long before the press labeled Darius Kalichi a visionary before awards and keynote speeches elevated his name. Amara had learned one rule that guided every decision she made: never confuse trust with surrender. In the early days of the company, when desks were borrowed, electricity unreliable, and success felt theoretical, Amara had insisted on structure, not romance, not optimism, structure. She registered the first holding company in her own name, advised by a senior legal consultant who owed her a favor from years before. She separated operating entities from asset-owning entities. She placed intellectual property under a trust that required multiple approvals, hers included. When Darius asked why everything felt so complicated, she smiled. Because one day, she said, simplicity will become your greatest vulnerability. He laughed then, kissed her cheek, trusted her, That trust was how she came to quietly hold 95% of the controlling interest spread across layers so complex that only 3 people fully understood it: Amara, her lawyer, and a man named Mr. Adeyemi, the company's original financial auditor. Mr. Adeyemi was old school, meticulous, loyal to process, not people. He had watched many empires collapse because men confused ownership with ego. When Darius rose quickly, Adeyemi noticed the shift before Amara did. One evening, years into the marriage, he called her privately. "Madam," he said carefully, "your husband is no longer asking the same questions." Amara understood immediately. "Does that worry you?" she asked. "It doesn't worry me," Adeyemi replied. "It alerts me." From that point, Amara resumed something she had quietly paused oversight. She didn't interfere. She observed. She saw the way Darius approved expenses without review, how he signed documents he barely skimmed, how new advisors, flatterers more than experts, circled him with praise disguised as counsel. She also noticed something else: a pattern of withdrawals routed through discretionary accounts, travel expenses that didn't align with official itineraries, gifts categorized vaguely as client engagement. When she asked casually about one of them, Darius waved it away. "Don't turn into one of those controlling wives," he joked. "You said you wanted peace." The word peace lingered like a warning. Amara said nothing more. She understood the danger of revealing intelligence too early. Instead, she activated safeguards. She requested silent confirmations from banks, updated signatures, reviewed shareholder agreements that Darius had never bothered to memorize. What shocked her wasn't what she found. It was how easily the system responded to her authority. With a single call, she could freeze credit lines. With 2 signatures, she could halt asset transfers. With 1 board meeting, she could reclaim voting dominance. The power was absolute. And still, she didn't touch it. Because Amara didn't believe in punishment without clarity. Then came the first confirmation that her silence was being mistaken for weakness. At a charity dinner, a woman approached her, too familiar, too confident. "You're so lucky," the woman said, glancing knowingly toward Darius across the room. "Men like that need understanding wives." Amara smiled politely. "Yes," she replied, "they do." That night, when Darius didn't come home until nearly dawn, she didn't confront him. She sat in her study, staring at the glass walls, reflecting a woman who had built an empire and chosen invisibility for love. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not about the marriage, about whether Darius still knew who she was. The next morning, she met Mr. Adeyemi. "I need you to prepare something," she told him calmly. "Madam," he asked. "A scenario," she said, "where I step away and the truth steps forward." He nodded slowly. "Are you ready for what that will mean?" Amara didn't hesitate. "I've always been ready," she said. "I just hoped I wouldn't need it." What Darius never understood was this: Amara never built power to dominate him. She built it to protect what they created together. But protection requires boundaries. And boundaries, once crossed, turn love into leverage. By the time whispers of another woman reached her, indirectly, cautiously, Amara already knew. Not the details, the inevitability. Still, she gave him room to return. She gave him time to choose honesty. She gave him grace. What she did not give him was ownership of her silence. Because silence, when misunderstood, becomes permission. And permission is how men lose everything without realizing it. When the moment came, when truth finally stood in front of her in the form of a newborn child in a hospital corridor, Amara did not act out of rage. She acted out of clarity. The structures were already in place, the decisions already made, the power already hers. All that remained was revelation. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly wrapped in applause disguised as admiration. That was how it happened to Darius Kalichi. The man who once double-checked every figure with Amara now skimmed reports with half an eye. The man who once asked her opinion before every major decision now announced outcomes as facts. "I've already handled it," he would say, adjusting his cufflinks. "Trust me." At first, Amara told herself it was stress. Growth brought pressure. Pressure demanded confidence. Confidence, she believed, could sometimes sound like arrogance. She chose patience. But patience began to feel like erasure. Darius's schedule grew unpredictable. Meetings ran late. Business trips multiplied. Phone calls were taken in the car. Voices lowered, laughter cut short the moment she entered the room. When she asked how his day had been, his answers became vague. Busy, productive, exhausting. No details, no stories, no shared space. The house, once alive with conversation, felt curated now. Silent, polished, hollow. At events, Amara noticed how people addressed Darius directly, bypassing her entirely. Sponsors shook his hand. Politicians praised his vision. Young women watched him with open admiration, their smiles lingering longer than necessary. Darius noticed too, and instead of retreating toward his wife, he leaned into it. Compliments fed his ego. Attention affirmed his worth. Somewhere along the way, he began to believe the narrative that surrounded him, that he was self-made, self-sufficient, untouchable. Amara saw the change most clearly one evening at a private dinner with investors. A potential partner raised a concern about long-term risk. Amara began to respond calm, informed, strategic. Darius cut in. "I've already considered that," he said smoothly. "We're moving forward." Amara stopped speaking, not because she lacked an answer, but because she understood the message. Later that night, she addressed it quietly. "You interrupted me," she said. Darius shrugged. "I didn't want to confuse them. Sometimes, too many voices weaken authority." Her chest tightened. "And when did my voice become a liability?" she asked. He sighed, tired. "You're reading too much into it. You wanted to step back, remember?" She remembered. What she didn't remember agreeing to was being dismissed. Still, she didn't fight him. Amara had learned something about men like Darius. Confrontation at the wrong moment only sharpened resistance. Instead, she observed. She noticed how he began to justify his absences defensively before she even asked. How he became irritated by small things. How affection turned mechanical. The warmth was gone, and where warmth once lived, entitlement had taken root. One night after another late return, Amara asked softly, "Is there something you want to tell me?" Darius froze. Just for a second. Then he laughed. "Tell you what," he asked. "You've been so distant lately. Maybe you're the one hiding something." The accusation stunned her, not because it was hurtful, but because it was revealing. Deflection. She realized then that Darius no longer saw her as a partner. He saw her as a fixture, reliable, unmoving, permanent. That illusion gave him courage. At the office, rumors began to circulate, nothing explicit, nothing concrete, just whispers of a young woman, often seen near his private elevator. A consultant whose role no one could quite define. Amara heard them indirectly. She didn't investigate. She didn't confront. She didn't panic, because she had learned something else in business and in life. When someone is determined to betray you, interruption only delays the truth. Let them reveal themselves. What hurt wasn't the possibility of another woman. It was the certainty that Darius no longer feared losing her. He believed she was too invested, too quiet, too dependent, too unaware. He was wrong on all counts. But men who feel invincible rarely recognize danger until the ground gives way. Amara's silence became intentional now. She stopped asking questions, stopped waiting up, stopped adjusting her schedule to his. She reclaimed her mornings, her routines, her clarity, and in doing so, she unsettled him. "You've changed," Darius said one evening, watching her read while he paced the room. She looked up. "So have you." "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," she replied calmly. The distance between them grew, not explosive, but surgical, clean, precise. At events, she smiled. At home, she withdrew. And Darius interpreted her composure as indifference. He mistook her restraint for resignation. That was his final miscalculation. Because while he pursued validation elsewhere, Amara was emotionally detaching, not out of bitterness, but preparation. She was mourning the man she married, while studying the man he had become. And the man he had become was careless. Careless with loyalty. Careless with truth. Careless with power he did not fully understand. When he stopped seeing her as a woman capable of leaving, he gave her something priceless. Freedom. Her name was Zainab Musa. Amara heard it long before she ever saw her. The name floated through conversations like a careless perfume never spoken directly to her, always mentioned in fragments. A junior consultant, a brand liaison, someone useful to Darius's expanding public image. Zainab was young, ambitious, and striking in the way youth often is, effortless, unburdened by consequence. She had grown up admiring men like Darius from a distance, watching their interviews, memorizing their success stories. To her, he was not just a man. He was a destination. When Darius first noticed her, it wasn't love. It was attention. She laughed at his jokes with genuine awe. She listened as though every word was instruction. She asked questions that made him feel brilliant rather than challenged. And most dangerously, she looked at him as if he were extraordinary. That look had become rare at home. Zainab entered his orbit quietly. At first, it was professional. Meetings that ran long, brainstorming sessions scheduled after hours, dinners that happened naturally when time slipped away. Darius told himself stories. "I deserve this. It's harmless. I'm not doing anything wrong. What he didn't tell himself was the truth, that he was drawn not to Zainab, but to how she made him feel about himself. Amara noticed the shift before the relationship fully crossed the line. It was in the way Darius mentioned her name casually at dinner, as if testing the sound of it. In the way he defended her competence too quickly when no one had questioned it. "She's sharp," he said once. "Reminds me of how driven you used to be." The comparison cut deeper than insult ever could. Amara smiled politely. "I'm glad you have good people around you." What she didn't say was that she recognized admiration evolving into dependence. At a corporate gala in Nairobi, Amara saw Zainab for the first time. She stood near Darius, not touching him, not claiming him, but positioned just close enough to signal relevance. Her dress was tasteful, but deliberate. Her laughter timed. Her eyes followed him constantly. Zainab noticed Amara too. Their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, something passed between them recognition. Zainab looked away first. Amara understood then that this was no accident. This was not a foolish girl stumbling into temptation. This was a woman who knew exactly where she stood and exactly where she wanted to be. Later that night, as they drove home, Amara said calmly, "Your consultant seems very attached." Darius stiffened. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" she asked gently. "She's just ambitious," he replied, irritated. "Don't start seeing threats where none exist." "Threat." The word settled heavily between them. Amara didn't argue. She never had to. She simply leaned back and looked out the window, watching city lights blur into patterns of inevitability. From that moment on, the triangle solidified. Zainab became bolder. Her messages more frequent. Her tone more personal. She learned Darius's schedule, his moods, his weaknesses. She praised him when the press criticized, supported him when deals went wrong, offered sympathy where Amara offered silence. To Zainab, silence looked like absence. She mistook dignity for disinterest. One evening, after a heated board meeting, Darius didn't come home. His phone went unanswered, his location unknown. Amara didn't call. She made tea, sat in her study, reviewed documents she hadn't touched in months. She knew, not because she had proof, but because betrayal always announces itself through behavior before evidence. The next morning, Darius returned, tired and distracted. "I fell asleep at the office," he said quickly. Amara nodded. "You should take better care of yourself." No accusation, no suspicion. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. From that point, Darius began compartmentalizing his life. Home became a place of obligation. Zainab became a place of validation. He told himself he deserved happiness. That Amara was too controlled, too distant, too composed. What he refused to admit was that he had changed the terms of intimacy, then blamed his wife for not adapting. Zainab, meanwhile, began to imagine permanence. She pictured herself beside him at events, in headlines, in houses that smelled like money and power. She didn't know about Amara's ownership. She didn't ask about legalities. She didn't care about structure. She cared about outcome. When she discovered she was pregnant, fear briefly eclipsed ambition. Darius's reaction was not joy. It was panic. "This can't happen," he said, pacing. "You don't understand what's at stake." Zainab's voice shook. "You said you cared about me." "I do," he replied. "But this complicates things." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and realized something painful. She was not the plan. She was the risk. Still, the child existed. Reality could not be undone. Darius promised discretion, support, distance. Zainab agreed outwardly, but inwardly something hardened. She would not be erased. Amara learned of the pregnancy indirectly through a doctor she trusted. The confirmation didn't shatter her. It clarified everything. This was no longer about temptation or mistakes. This was about choice, and Darius had chosen secrecy over honesty, preservation of image over respect, fear over responsibility. That night, Amara slept peacefully, because when truth finally surfaced, she would not meet it with confusion. She would meet it with preparation. And when the moment came, when the three of them stood in the same hospital corridor, connected by blood and betrayal, Amara would not compete. She would withdraw, because sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is departure. The truth arrived not with noise, but with weight. It settled into Amara's chest the morning she received the call from the private clinic, one of those quiet facilities the elite preferred, where confidentiality was currency and discretion was assumed. "Madam," the doctor said carefully, "there has been a delivery. We believed you should be aware." Amara closed her eyes. She thanked him, hung up, sat still. So it had happened. Not a rumor. Not a suspicion. Not a whispered warning. A child. For a moment, memories flooded her mind, her wedding day. Darius's promises, the plans they once spoke of in low voices at night. Children. Legacy. Continuity. Now that future existed, just not with her. What surprised Amara wasn't the pain. She had felt that coming for weeks, like a storm sensed long before clouds gather. What surprised her was the calm. She dressed slowly that day, chose neutral colors, flat shoes, no jewelry. She didn't cry. She didn't rehearse conversations. She didn't plan confrontation. She simply drove. At the clinic, the atmosphere was hushed. Nurses moved with practiced softness. The scent of antiseptic mingled with fresh linen and something else, new life. Amara walked the corridor with steady steps, and then she saw them. Darius stood near a window, cradling a newborn, wrapped in pale fabric. His posture was stiff, his expression torn between awe and terror. The baby's tiny face was peaceful, oblivious to the consequences of its arrival. Beside him stood Zainab. Her eyes were tired, her body fragile from birth, but her hand rested possessively on Darius's arm. She looked like someone who had crossed a threshold and now dared the world to challenge her place. The moment froze. Darius looked up, his face drained of color. "Amara," he began. She raised her hand not to silence him, but to stop the moment from unraveling into chaos. She took in the scene with clinical clarity. The baby's breath. Zainab's quiet triumph masked as vulnerability, Darius's fear, and in that instant, Amara understood something fundamental. This wasn't about her marriage anymore. This was about responsibility. She felt no urge to scream, no desire to humiliate, no impulse to compete with a woman who had just given birth. She nodded once acknowledgement without forgiveness. Then she turned. Behind her, Darius panicked. "Amara, please," he called, shifting the child awkwardly. "Let me explain." She stopped walking, but did not face him. "There is nothing to explain," she said calmly. "You made your choice." Zainab watched, confused by the absence of confrontation. She had prepared for anger, tears, accusations. What she saw instead unsettled her. Silence. Amara left the clinic without another word. Outside sunlight felt too bright, too ordinary for a day that altered everything. Darius chased after her, nearly tripping on the steps. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "We need to talk." Amara turned, then finally meeting his eyes. "You needed to talk," before she replied. "Now, you need to take care of your child." Her voice held no bitterness. That frightened him. At home, the fallout began quietly. Darius didn't return that night. Zainab stayed at the clinic longer than planned, watched over by staff who treated her like a fragile secret. Darius oscillated between guilt and denial. He told himself Amara would cool down, that she always did, that she would process and return composed as ever. He underestimated the significance of what had happened. Amara, meanwhile, moved with purpose. She contacted her lawyer, her auditor, her personal assistant. "I'm activating the contingency," she said simply. No anger, no tears, just instruction. She reviewed documents she had drafted years earlier, never expecting to use them, but never foolish enough to discard them. She did not seek revenge. She sought closure. Zainab, discharged days later, expected something different. She expected confrontation. A call. A message. Nothing came. Days passed. Darius tried to speak with Amara again, but she remained unreachable, not absent, but inaccessible. She had moved out, quietly, efficiently. No scene, no announcement, just absence. Zainab felt the shift immediately. Darius grew distant, not with guilt, but with worry. Meetings distracted him. Sleep eluded him. He began snapping at Zainab, not because of the child, but because of uncertainty. "Why hasn't she said anything?" he muttered one night. Zainab bristled. "What do you expect her to do?" "Congratulate us. I expect her to fight," he said without thinking. The words hung heavy. Zainab realized then that she wasn't the prize. She was the consequence. The baby cried often. Darius helped when he could, but his mind was elsewhere, circling questions he hadn't thought to ask before. Why hadn't Amara threatened him? Why hadn't she demanded explanations? Why hadn't she asked for anything? The silence became unbearable. At the office, subtle changes began to surface. A line of credit delayed. A partner postponed a meeting. A signature requested confirmation hers. Darius dismissed it at first. Coincidence. But Amara never believed in coincidence. Neither did Mr. Adeyemi. "Sir," he said cautiously during a review meeting, "some approvals are now being routed differently." "By whom?" Darius snapped. There was a pause. "By Madam." The word struck like a blade. For the first time since the clinic, Darius felt fear not of scandal, not of divorce, but of losing control. He realized then that the baby was not the beginning of his problem. It was the moment everything he had taken for granted began to shift. And Amara, quiet, unseen, underestimated, was no longer waiting for understanding. She was preparing for revelation. The hospital did not change after Amara left it. The floors remained polished. The nurses continued their rounds. The newborns cried, breathed, slept unaware of the adult consequences tied to their existence. But for Darius Kalichi, that corridor became a place his mind returned to again and again. He replayed it obsessively. The way Amara had stood there, still composed, unbroken. The way she had looked at the child without hatred. The way she had walked away without asking for anything. No threats, no ultimatums, no tears. That absence of reaction unsettled him more than any public confrontation ever could. For days after the birth, Darius lived in a state of emotional disarray. He moved between the clinic, his office, and a temporary apartment he rented just for space. Zainab stayed quiet, exhausted from childbirth. Sensing that something had shifted, something she couldn't name or control. Every time the baby cried, Darius flinched. Not because he didn't care, but because the sound reminded him of the moment he lost something he had assumed was permanent. At the clinic, Zainab tried to bridge the gap. She didn't even look angry, she said one evening, holding the child. Maybe she understands, Darius snapped. She understands too much, he replied. That's what scares me. Zainab frowned. Scares you? Yes, he said sharply. Because when Amara goes quiet, it means she's thinking. Zainab said nothing. She didn't know Amara well, but she knew enough to feel a growing unease. Days passed. Then a week. Still no word from Amara. No calls, no messages, no legal notices. Just silence. Darius tried reaching out himself first, through texts, then calls, then emails. None were answered. He drove by their home late one night, hoping to see lights on a sign of normalcy. The house was dark, not abandoned, but deliberately empty. Inside, the company tension began to surface. Darius noticed small disruptions at first, subtle delays, requests for approvals that had never required them before. During a board meeting, a senior executive raised a question about shareholder alignment. We need confirmation from the primary controlling entity, the man said carefully. Darius frowned. I am the controlling entity. The room fell silent. Mr. Adeyemi cleared his throat. With respect, sir, he said evenly, the structure indicates otherwise. Darius laughed. That's ridiculous. Adeyemi slid a document across the table. Darius skimmed it, then froze. Names, entities, percentages. And there it was, 95%. Held not by him, but by Amara. The room seemed to tilt. That can't be right, Darius said, his voice tight. There must be an error. There is no error, Adeyemi replied. These structures were put in place years ago. Why am I only seeing this now? Adeyemi hesitated just long enough to answer truthfully. Because you never asked. The words echoed in Darius's mind like a verdict. Suddenly, the hospital corridor made sense. Amara hadn't walked away because she was defeated. She had walked away because she already knew how this would end. Darius rushed out of the meeting. He drove not home, not to the office, but back to the clinic. He needed to ground himself, to see the child again, to remind himself that something real had come from all this chaos. But when he arrived, the room was empty. Zainab and the baby had been discharged earlier that day. No goodbye, No warning. Panic tightened his chest. He called her immediately. "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" he demanded when she answered. "I didn't know I needed permission," Zainab replied coolly. "You've been distracted. I'm dealing with a lot," he snapped. "So am I," she said quietly. "I just gave birth to your child." He rubbed his forehead. "I know, I'm sorry." There was a pause. "Is she divorcing you?" Zainab asked. Darius didn't answer. "Is that why you're like this?" she pressed. "I don't know what she's doing," he admitted. "That's the problem." Zainab exhaled slowly. For the first time, fear outweighed ambition. She had imagined this differently. She had imagined drama, yes, but also attention. Struggle, but also eventual security. What she saw now was a man unraveling not because of guilt, but because of loss of control. That night, Darius sat alone in his apartment, staring at documents spread across the table. He read them again and again. Amara's signature appeared everywhere. Not hidden, just ignored. He thought back to their early days, how she insisted on structure, on separation, on legal clarity. He had laughed then. Now that laughter tasted bitter. At the same time, Amara was somewhere else entirely. She sat in a quiet hotel suite overlooking the city she had helped build from the shadows. The lights shimmered below, indifferent to personal collapse. She poured herself a glass of water and reviewed the final report from her legal team. Everything was ready. She felt no joy, only resolution. The hospital moment, the sight of the baby, the betrayal made flesh had not broken her. It had freed her. She had loved Darius once, truly. But love, she now understood, was not meant to survive disrespect. And motherhood, hers unrealized, Zainab's newly claimed, was not a weapon. It was a responsibility. Amara had chosen not to weaponize it. She had chosen to step aside. What Darius didn't know, yet what Zainab could not imagine, was that the real confrontation had not happened at the clinic. That moment had only been the exit. The reckoning was still ahead, and when it came, it would not arrive with shouting or spectacle. It would arrive with signatures, with numbers, with silence louder than screams. Panic did not strike Darius Kalichi all at once. It arrived in waves, small at first, almost dismissible. A delayed approval here, a postponed meeting there. He told himself these were temporary disruptions, the kind that happened when any large organization adjusted its pace. But beneath the surface, something deeper was unraveling. For the first time in years, doors that had always opened for him hesitated. At the bank, a familiar manager smiled too carefully. At the office, assistants asked for confirmations they had never required before. At home, if the rented apartment could be called that, silence echoed louder than any argument. Darius began calling Amara again. This time, not with irritation, but urgency. "Let's talk," he left in a voice message. "We don't have to agree, but we need to understand each other. This is bigger than us." No response. Each unanswered message sharpened his anxiety. He started arriving early, to the office, staying late, reviewing documents he had ignored for years. What he found unsettled him deeply. Ownership charts, voting thresholds, contingency clauses. Every road led back to one undeniable truth. Amara had always been there, quietly holding the center. How had he missed it? The answer was uncomfortable. He hadn't missed it. He had dismissed it. In meetings, Darius began pushing harder, demanding loyalty, asserting authority with a force that felt increasingly hollow. Why wasn't I informed, he snapped at one executive? Because approval was pending. The man replied carefully. Pending from whom? There was a pause. From Madam. The title stung more than the name. That afternoon, Darius drove across the city without direction, his thoughts racing. He passed places that had once symbolized triumph construction sites bearing his company's logo billboards, with his face smiling confidently. All of it felt fragile now, conditional. Back at the apartment, Zainab tried to soothe him. "You're tired," she said, rocking the baby gently. "Everything will stabilize." Darius didn't look at her. "This isn't about fatigue," he replied. "This is about control." Zainab frowned. "Control over what?" "Over my life," he snapped, then immediately regretted it. She stiffened. "You mean over our life?" He didn't answer. The distance between them widened, not because of the baby, but because of uncertainty. Zainab had entered his world expecting power by proximity. What she found instead was instability. She began to sense that she had not replaced Amara. She had disrupted something far more complex. That night, Darius finally did something he had avoided for years. He called his lawyer. "I need options," he said bluntly. "What happens if my wife pulls back?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Sir," the lawyer said slowly, "I need to be honest with you." Darius's jaw tightened. "Go on. Your wife is not pulling back." The lawyer continued. "She is withdrawing authority that was always hers." The words hit like a blow. "What about my position?" Darius asked. "My shares." "You hold minority equity," the lawyer replied. "Operational influence, yes. Ultimate control, no." Darius hung up without another word. For the first time, fear outweighed pride. He began reaching out to allies, partners, investors, old friends who owed him favors. Some responded politely, others delayed. A few didn't respond at all. It dawned on him then that his network had been built on perception, and perception was collapsing. Desperate Darius tried a different approach. He went to Amara's mother. He arrived unannounced, dressed humbly, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. He apologized. He spoke of regret. He asked for intervention. The older woman listened quietly. When he finished, she sighed. "My daughter does not make decisions lightly," she said. "If she has stepped away, it means she gave you every chance." "I love her," Darius said, his voice cracking. "Love is not what you abandoned." The woman replied gently. "Respect is." He left with nothing but his thoughts. Back at the office, pressure mounted. A critical deal stalled. A supplier demanded reassurance. A board meeting was scheduled without his input. When Darius confronted Adeyemi, the auditor remained composed. "Sir," he said, "panic will only accelerate what you fear." "What do you want me to do?" Darius demanded. Adeyemi met his eyes. "Ask yourself why she prepared for this long before you gave her a reason." The question haunted him. At home, Zainab confronted him at last. "You keep saying her name," she said, "even when you're not talking." Darius rubbed his face. "You don't understand." "Then explain," she said sharply. "Because I need to know where I stand." He hesitated, and in that hesitation she found her answer. "I'm not sure," he admitted. Zainab's expression hardened. You told me I mattered, she said quietly, that I wasn't just a mistake. You're not, he replied quickly. This is just complicated. She looked at the baby, then back at him. I didn't bring a child into the world to be a complication. Her words struck him harder than anger ever could. For the first time, Darius realized the cost of his actions extended beyond reputation and wealth. Two women stood on opposite sides of his decisions. One had built with him. The other now depended on him, and he was failing both. That night, he sat alone, staring at the city lights, replaying every moment he had dismissed Amara's quiet strength as passivity. He understood now too late that power did not announce itself. It prepared. And Amara had prepared for a moment like this, not out of malice but wisdom. The man who once thought himself untouchable now faced a truth he could not escape. Walking away had not been Amara's weakness. It had been her final act of control. Amara did not disappear. She simply became unreachable. From the outside, it looked like retreat. To those who didn't know her, it appeared as though she had folded quietly, another woman wounded by betrayal, choosing dignity over drama. But Amara had never confused dignity with surrender. She relocated to a discreet residence on the edge of the city, far from the social circuits she once hosted. No staff announcements, no moving trucks. Just a quiet transfer of personal items and a single instruction to her assistant. Cancel everything that isn't essential. Essential, in Amara's world, had a very specific meaning. The first meeting she held was not emotional. It was procedural. Her legal team gathered around a long table, documents arranged with surgical precision. Every page represented a decision she had made years ago. Decisions that now carried weight. I want a clean withdrawal, Amara said calmly. No public spectacle, no retaliation. One of the lawyers hesitated. Madam, with your position, you could— I'm not interested in humiliation, she interrupted gently. I'm interested in clarity. They nodded. Clarity was her language. Over the next few days, Amara executed what she had once called the contingency. She restructured her personal involvement, transferred operational authority to interim executives she trusted, activated clauses that required dual approval, hers included, for major expenditures. She didn't shut the company down. She slowed it, strategically, like easing pressure on a wound so the bleeding could be identified. At the same time, she separated herself legally from Darius. Not through a dramatic filing, through quiet compliance. Her name was removed from shared residences. Her assets clarified. Her accounts insulated. Every move was deliberate, every step documented. Darius felt the effects almost immediately. A scheduled acquisition stalled due to pending alignment. A planned expansion paused under governance review. A public appearance canceled due to internal restructuring. None of it was aggressive. All of it was effective. From his perspective, it felt like being trapped in a maze where the walls moved silently. He tried calling again. This time, Amara answered. Thank you for finally responding, he said, relief flooding his voice. We need to talk. We are talking, she replied calmly. I don't understand what you're doing, he admitted. Why can't we just sit down and— This is me sitting down, she sighs, and doing what's necessary. Necessary for what he asked. Frustration seeping in. For separation. Amara answered simply. Not just as a couple. As partners. There was a long silence. "You're destroying everything we built," Darius said finally. "No," she replied. "I'm stepping away from what you changed. You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself." The distinction stunned him. "You walked away without a word," he accused. "You left me to deal with this alone." "I walked away. After years of silence," she said evenly. "I didn't leave you alone. I left you with the consequences of your choices." Her tone wasn't cold. It was resolved. Darius felt something crack inside him. Not anger, not fear, but realization. She was not asking for explanations. She was closing a chapter. In the days that followed, Amara withdrew further, not emotionally, but structurally. She declined invitations, ignored gossip, let speculation bloom without feeding it. People talked, of course. They always did. Some said she was bitter. Others said she was broken. A few suggested she had been pushed aside. None of them knew the truth. Behind closed doors, Amara met with organizations she had long admired but never publicly aligned with. She discussed investments, not as charity, but partnership. Education initiatives, women-led enterprises, infrastructure projects rooted in community development. She wasn't reinventing herself. She was returning to who she had always been. At the same time, she refused to engage in public narrative. When a journalist reached out for comment, she declined politely. "No statement," she said. "Not yet." Because statements create sides. And Amara wasn't interested in sides. She was interested in outcomes. Darius, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. He sent messages filled with regret, apologies that came too late, promises he had once believed were unnecessary. "I made a mistake," he wrote. "We can fix this. I still love you." Amara read them once, then archived them. Love she knew did not erase pattern, and apologies did not undo preparation. One evening, she sat alone on her balcony watching the city. Lights pulse with indifferent rhythm. She thought of the years she had invested not just money, but faith, the trust she had placed in a man who mistook support for submission. She did not feel hatred. She felt release. The decision to withdraw was not born of vengeance. It was born of self-respect. The next morning, she authorized the final phase, a formal notice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't personal. It was precise. The board would be informed of governance realignment. Operational authority would be redistributed. A shareholder meeting would be scheduled. Darius would learn the full extent of the truth soon, but not from her, from the system he had ignored. As Amara signed the last document, her hand steady, her expression calm, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because the situation was resolved, but because she was no longer negotiating with betrayal. She had stepped out of the storm, not by running, but by understanding where shelter truly lay. The city continued to buzz. Deals would rise and fall. Headlines would spin. But somewhere beneath it all, a shift had occurred. The woman everyone thought had walked away with nothing was about to reveal she had always held everything. Collapse did not announce itself in Darius Kalichi's world. There were no sirens, no headlines, no dramatic exits. It came quietly disguised as delays, hesitations, polite emails that ended with, "We'll revisit this soon." At first, Darius dismissed it as coincidence. Markets fluctuated. Partners got cautious. Banks reviewed exposure. These things happened. But then patterns emerged. A foreign investor postponed funding until governance clarity is restored. A long-standing supplier requested revised guarantees. A bank declined to extend a credit facility it had renewed without question for years. Darius sat in his office late one night, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense. The numbers weren't wrong. They were constrained. The company still existed. Operations continued. Staff remained employed. But momentum, the force that once carried everything forward, had vanished. He summoned his senior team. "Why are we slowing down?" he demanded. The executives exchanged careful looks. "It's not a slowdown," one said cautiously. "It's a pause." A pause ordered by whom? Darius snapped. Another executive cleared her throat. By the structures in place. What structures, he pressed. The ones requiring additional approvals, she replied. Darius felt his patience snap. "From my wife," he asked bluntly. No one answered. Silence once again delivered the truth. Outside, the company whispers grew louder. Industry insiders noticed his absence from key events. Journalists observed that press releases were becoming vague. Analysts flagged uncertainty. Still nothing pointed directly to Amara. That was her brilliance. She hadn't attacked. She had removed friction from her own exit, and friction from Darius's unchecked authority. Zainab felt the shift in a different way. The apartment that once felt temporary now felt unstable. Darius was distracted, irritable, distant, not with grief, but with calculation. He spent hours on calls, voice low tone, urgent. "What's happening?" she asked one night, holding the baby close. "Nothing," he replied too quickly. "Just business." But business no longer sounded confident. It sounded defensive. When Zainab suggested hiring a nanny or upgrading security, Darius snapped. "Do you know how much uncertainty I'm managing right now?" She stared at him. "I just had your child, and I'm trying to protect our future," he said sharply. She fell silent. That silence grew into resentment. She had imagined becoming part of a powerful legacy. Instead, she found herself inside a house built on assumptions she didn't understand. Meanwhile, Amara watched the effects from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with acceptance. Her phone rang often. Advisors sought clarity. Partners asked for reassurance. She gave none publicly. Privately, she remained consistent. Stability requires trust, she told them. Trust requires transparency. And transparency was exactly what Darius had avoided. As weeks passed, the impact spread. A planned IPO extension stalled. A government partnership requested restructuring. A multinational firm quietly withdrew interest. None of these actions accused Darius. They simply responded to uncertainty. Uncertainty is poison to power. Darius tried to counter it. He scheduled meetings, made speeches, promised alignment. But without Amara's signature, his words lost weight. He began to understand the scale of what he had dismissed. This wasn't a marital dispute. It was a governance shift. In desperation, Darius reached out to the board again. "I want to call an emergency meeting," he said. "We need to move forward." The response came hours later. "The meeting is already scheduled," read the message, "at Madam's request." The word Madam followed him everywhere now. He drove aimlessly that evening, replaying every moment he had brushed off her insight. Every time he had silenced her voice in public to appear decisive. Decisiveness without authority, he realized too late, was performance. At the apartment, Zainab confronted him. "You're losing everything," she said, no longer hiding her fear. "Why won't you tell me the truth?" Darius looked at her, then really looked, and saw exhaustion reflected back at him. "I underestimated her," he admitted quietly. Zainab's eyes widened. My wife," he said. "She built more than I knew." Zainab felt the ground shift beneath her. "You mean, she owns most of it," he interrupted. "Almost all." The realization hit her hard. So this was why Amara hadn't fought, why she hadn't begged, why she hadn't needed to. Zainab tightened her grip on the baby. "What does that mean for us?" she asked softly. Darius didn't answer, because for the first time he truly didn't know. Outside their personal lives, the corporate world adjusted without mercy. Employees sensed tension. Middle managers grew cautious. Decisions slowed. Yet the company did not collapse. It stabilized. Under restraint, under oversight, under a structure that no longer revolved around one man's impulse. And that truth was unbearable for Darius. He had believed himself indispensable. Now, the system proved otherwise. The final blow came quietly. A letter from the bank. A routine notice written in neutral language. Due to changes in governance and risk profile, we are revising our exposure. Darius read it 3 times. This was not a threat. It was an acknowledgement. The empire he thought he controlled no longer responded to him. That night, he sat alone, lights off, city noise distant. He thought of Amara, not with anger, but awe. She had not destroyed him. She had simply removed herself. And without her, the illusion of his power unraveled on its own. The next morning, Darius woke with a singular understanding. He had not lost his company in one moment. He had lost it the day he stopped listening. And somewhere across the city, Amara signed another document, calm, composed, watching consequences unfold exactly as she had predicted. The collapse was not loud. It was inevitable. The truth did not explode into Darius Kalichi's life. It unfolded slowly, deliberately, irreversibly. The boardroom was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, reflecting off polished wood and steel symbols of power that now felt ceremonial rather than absolute. Darius sat at the head of the table out of habit. No one corrected him. No one acknowledged it either. When Mr. Adeyemi entered with the company secretary and 2 external legal consultants, Darius's pulse quickened. This was not a routine meeting. This was a reckoning disguised as procedure. "Let's begin," Adeyemi said calmly. The first document was projected onto the screen. Ownership structure. Darius leaned forward. Layered entities appeared holding companies' trusts, special purpose vehicles. Each one meticulously organized, cross-referenced, legally insulated. And then, unmistakably, Amara Okoye, beneficial owner, 95% voting control. Darius swallowed. "This has to be a misinterpretation," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. I founded this company. No one disputes your role in operations, Adeyemi replied evenly. But ownership and control are not synonymous. A legal consultant spoke next. These structures were established at inception, she said. They were amended only to strengthen governance, not to alter intent. Darius felt heat rise to his face. You're telling me, he said slowly, that my wife owns almost everything, and I didn't know. You knew, Adeyemi corrected gently. You simply chose not to engage with the details. The room seemed to shrink. Darius remembered the early days, how Amara insisted on clarity, on documentation, on safeguards, how he brushed it off as caution bordering on pessimism. He had mistaken foresight for fear. What happens now? He asked, voice tight. Adeyemi glanced at the secretary, then back at Darius. At Madame's instruction, a shareholder meeting will be convened, he said. The agenda will address governance realignment. The word realignment landed like a verdict. This is her revenge, Darius snapped. Adeyemi did not flinch. This is her exit. The distinction cut deeper than any accusation. Across the city, Amara sat in a private conference room overlooking the lagoon. Her posture was relaxed, her expression composed. Around her sat advisors who had known her long before the headlines attached her to a man. Everything is proceeding as expected, one said. There will be resistance, I'm aware, Amara replied calmly. But resistance fades when facts remain consistent. She did not ask about Darius's reaction. She already knew. Back in the boardroom, Darius tried one final angle. This company's success depends on leadership continuity, he argued. Destabilizing it helps no one. That's precisely why Madam has taken this approach. The legal consultant replied, there will be no public fallout. No scandal. Just removal, Darius muttered. Just separation, Adeyemi corrected. When the meeting ended, Darius remained seated long after everyone else left. For the first time in his career, he felt small. Not because he lacked intelligence or drive, but because he had ignored the very foundation beneath him. Outside the boardroom, whispers spread. Not gossip information. Senior managers learned the truth quietly. Partners received briefings. Banks were reassured. The system adjusted. And in adjusting, it revealed something startling. The company did not need Darius to survive. It needed structure. That realization hit him hardest. At home, Zainab noticed the shift immediately. He no longer paced with anger. He no longer made calls demanding loyalty. He moved slowly, thoughtfully, as if the world had finally caught up to him. What happened? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, she owns almost everything. Zainab stared. She planned this? No, Darius replied. She prepared. The difference lingered between them. Zainab looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. What about us? She asked quietly. Darius hesitated. I don't know. It was the most honest thing he had said in months. Days later, the shareholder meeting took place. Amara attended, not as a wife, as an owner. She entered the room without spectacle. No entourage, no announcement, just quiet authority. Some executives avoided her eyes. Others nodded respectfully. Darius watched from his seat, heart pounding. When Amara spoke, her voice was calm, measured. This company was built on shared vision, she said. That vision has evolved. So must its leadership structure. No accusations, no bitterness, no personal grievances, just facts. She outlined the transition plan, interim leadership, safeguards, continuity. Every concern was addressed before it could be raised. When she finished, there was no applause, only acceptance. Darius stood. "Is this final?" he asked, his voice low. Amara met his eyes. Yes. No anger, no triumph, just truth. In that moment, Darius understood the full scope of his mistake. He had underestimated not her power, but her restraint. She had loved him enough to build with him. She respected herself enough to walk away when that love was no longer honored. As the meeting adjourned, Darius felt something settle inside him. Regret. Not because he lost wealth, but because he lost a woman who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. And as Amara left the building, sunlight catching her silhouette, one truth became undeniable to everyone who watched. She had not revealed her ownership to humiliate him. She had revealed it to reclaim herself. They met in a quiet room that felt deliberately neutral. No boardroom, no home, no hospital corridor heavy with memory. Just a private lounge overlooking the city, glass walls, muted colors, silence curated to prevent spectacle. Darius arrived first. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at a skyline that once mirrored his certainty. The city still moved. Traffic flowed. Buildings stood tall. Everything looked the same. Nothing felt familiar. When Amara entered, he turned instinctively. She looked unchanged, composed, elegant, self-contained. But there was something different now. Not coldness, finality. They didn't embrace. They didn't sit immediately. For a moment, they simply stood there. Two people who had shared a life, now separated by truth. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Darius," said finally. "I didn't agree to meet Amara," replied calmly. "I agreed to close a conversation." The distinction stung. He nodded. "That's fair." They sat. Silence stretched, not awkward, but honest. "I didn't come to argue," Darius said, "or to beg." Amara met his eyes. "Then speak." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't know," he said, "about the extent of your ownership." "You knew," Amara corrected gently. "You just didn't ask." He winced. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting you by taking charge." Amara tilted her head slightly. "You thought you were protecting yourself," she said, "by not listening?" He nodded. Yes, that single word carried more weight than 1,000 excuses. "I loved you," he said quietly. "I still do." Amara's expression didn't change. "Love," she replied, "is not a feeling you declare after the damage is done. It's a practice, one you stopped maintaining." "I made a mistake," he said. "No," she answered calmly. "You made a pattern." The difference settled heavily between them. Darius leaned forward, voice strained. "I never meant to humiliate you or replace you." "You didn't replace me," Amara said. "You removed yourself from partnership." He closed his eyes briefly. "I panicked," he confessed. "When I found out about the pregnancy, I didn't know how to handle it." "And so you chose secrecy," Amara said, "which forced clarity." "I wanted time," he said. "You took time," she replied, "from honesty." Another silence. Darius straightened. "Is there nothing left to salvage?" Amara considered him not with nostalgia, but assessment. There is nothing left to negotiate, she said, but there is something left to acknowledge. He looked up. You built something remarkable, she continued. Not alone, but you did contribute. I won't erase that. Then why remove me? He asked. I didn't remove you, she said. I removed myself from a structure that no longer respected me. He swallowed hard. I lost more than a company, he said. I lost you. Amara's voice softened, not with forgiveness, but compassion. You lost me long before the hospital, she said. I just stopped carrying the weight alone. Darius nodded slowly. What happens now? He asked. For you, she replied. Or for us? For me, he said honestly. You'll remain involved, Amara answered. Operationally, within boundaries, with oversight. You're demoting me, he said quietly. No, she replied. I'm redefining accountability. And personally? He asked. Amara paused. Personally, she said we move forward separately. The words landed gently, but they ended everything. Darius leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I deserved that, he murmured. Amara stood. I didn't come to punish you, she said. I came to end the negotiation between my dignity and your comfort. He stood as well. I'm sorry, he said, finally allowing the emotion to break through. Not because I lost control, but because I lost sight of you. Amara met his gaze one last time. Apologies don't restore trust, she said. They explain regret. Then she turned. At the door, she paused not to look back, but to speak. One more thing, she said. Yes, Darius replied. The child, Amara continued. He deserves stability, not secrecy, not resentment. Darius nodded, eyes wet. I'll do better. For his sake, she said, not mine. And with that, she left. Darius remained standing long after the door closed. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt accountability. He understood now that Amara had not taken power from him. She had simply reclaimed what she had never surrendered. And in doing so, she had given him something unexpected. A mirror. Consequences rarely arrive the way people expect. They don't always come with outrage or spectacle. Sometimes they come as distance, as silence, as doors that once opened, now hesitate. For Darius Kalichi, the price of betrayal unfolded across weeks, not in one crushing blow, but in a series of small losses that accumulated into something irreversible. The public narrative remained polite. There were no scandalous headlines, no viral footage, no dramatic statements. On the surface, everything looked composed. Corporate press releases spoke of strategic realignment. Interviews framed change as growth. Analysts used neutral language. But beneath that restraint, perception shifted. Invitations slowed. Endorsements paused. Speaking engagements were quietly rerouted to other priorities. Darius noticed it first in rooms where his presence once commanded attention. Conversations dulled when he approached. Eyes flickered not with fear, but calculation. People listened without leaning in. Power, he realized, was not just about authority. It was about trust. And trust, once fractured, altered every interaction. Within the company, the effects were sharper. Executives who once deferred to him now referenced process. Decisions required consensus. Oversight committees multiplied, not as punishment, but as protection. Darius was no longer the axis. He was a contributor. The adjustment humiliated him at first. Then it educated him. He began to see the company as Amara had always seen it, not as an extension of ego, but as a system that demanded stewardship. Still, the cost was heavy. The man who once defined direction now answered questions. The man who once spoke last now listened first. Outside the office, Zainab faced her own reckoning. Motherhood grounded her in ways ambition never had. The baby needed routine, consistency presence, things that power alone could not provide. She watched Darius struggle, torn between responsibility and regret, and realized the truth she had avoided. She had not entered a love story. She had entered a fracture. The glamour she imagined faded quickly. There were no galas, no red carpets, no celebratory announcements, just long nights, tight budgets, careful planning. Zainab resented Amara at first, not for what she did, but for how effortlessly she moved on. But over time, resentment gave way to understanding. Amara had not competed with her. She had exited. And that exit forced Zainab to face a reality she hadn't prepared for. Being chosen out of secrecy did not equal being valued openly. One evening, after another tense discussion about finances and schedules, Zainab confronted Darius. "You're still mourning her," she said quietly. Darius didn't deny it. "I'm mourning what I lost," he replied, "and what I failed to protect." Zainab looked down at the child sleeping in her arms. "I don't want my son growing up in regret," she said, "or in comparison." Darius nodded slowly. "I know." They reached an unspoken agreement that night. Their relationship would not be built on resentment or rivalry. It would be built on responsibility. That decision did not bring romance, but it brought clarity. Meanwhile, Amara's world expanded quietly, deliberately. She stepped into rooms she had avoided for years, not as a wife, not as a symbol, as a decision maker. Her presence surprised some, inspired others. She didn't speak about the past. She spoke about systems, sustainability, accountability. Women approached her privately, executives, founders, entrepreneurs, seeking guidance not just on business, but boundaries. "How did you know when to leave?" one asked. Amara answered honestly. "When staying required me to become smaller." Her influence grew, not because she sought attention, but because she offered structure in a world exhausted by spectacle. She funded initiatives that emphasized governance over personality, built platforms that elevated collaboration over dominance, and slowly her name became associated with something different: stability. Back in Darius's world, the final cost revealed itself in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, he received an invitation to attend a conference where he had once been the keynote speaker. This time, he was listed as a panelist. Not first, not last. Just one among many. He considered declining. Then he accepted. On stage, listening to others speak, he realized something profound. He had spent years believing power was proven by how loudly one was heard. Amara had proven otherwise. After the event, a young entrepreneur approached him. "Sir," the man said respectfully, "what's the most important lesson you've learned?" Darius thought of the hospital corridor, the boardroom, the quiet meeting room overlooking the city. He answered simply, "Never confuse silence with submission." The man nodded, unaware of the depth behind the words. That evening, Darius sat alone, reflecting on the trajectory of his life. He had lost prestige. He had lost dominance. But he had gained something more difficult and more necessary: humility. He no longer blamed Amara. He understood now that betrayal did not begin with another woman. It began with dismissal, with the belief that partnership could survive imbalance. And the price of that belief was not just loss, but transformation. Across the city, Amara watched the sunset from her office window, reviewing reports that spoke of growth, impact, continuity. She felt no triumph, only alignment. She had not won. She had chosen herself. And that choice rippled outward, touching lives, shaping futures, redefining what strength looked like in a world that often mistook noise for power. The cost of betrayal had been paid not in destruction, but in redistribution. Of authority, of respect, of purpose. And for everyone involved, the lesson lingered: what you take for granted will one day demand its value back. Amara's rebirth did not begin with applause. It began with quiet mornings. No chauffeur waiting outside. No social calendar dictating her hours. No role to perform. For the first time in years, she woke up without negotiating her identity with anyone else's expectations. She returned to routines she had once abandoned: early walks, handwritten notes, long reading sessions where ideas were explored not for profit, but clarity. The stillness felt unfamiliar at first. Then it felt necessary. Her re-entry into the business world was intentional, selective. She declined most invitations, accepting only those aligned with her principles. When she spoke plainly about governance, about ethics, about systems that outlast personalities. People listened, not because she was louder, but because she was grounded. At a regional economic forum, Amara took the stage, not as a spectacle, but as substance. "I'm not interested in being exceptional," she said calmly. "I'm interested in being reliable." The room leaned in. She spoke of sustainable leadership, of shared ownership models, of structures designed to protect people, not egos. Afterward, women gathered around her. Some young, some seasoned, asking questions they rarely felt safe asking out loud. How do you lead without being erased? How do you protect love without losing yourself? How do you walk away without burning everything down? Amara answered honestly. "You don't burn bridges," she said. "You build exits." Her investment portfolio reflected that philosophy. She funded companies led by women who prioritized transparency. She supported enterprises rooted in community development rather than rapid extraction. She insisted on boards that asked hard questions and listened to the answers. Her name became synonymous with stability, not trend, not spectacle. Stability. At the same time, she began something deeply personal, a foundation not bearing her name focused on mentorship for women navigating power transitions, divorce, leadership, shifts, inheritance, conflicts. "Power changes people," she told her team. "We should prepare women to survive those changes with dignity." In private moments, Amara reflected on how far she had come, not with nostalgia, but understanding. She no longer saw her marriage as a failure. She saw it as a season, a chapter that taught her the cost of silence and the strength of preparation. She did not demonize Darius. She simply placed him where he belonged in the past. They crossed paths occasionally at industry events. Their interactions were polite, professional, neutral. No tension, no intimacy, just mutual recognition of history. Darius noticed the change in her. She no longer carried the weight of explanation. She moved with ease, with ownership not just of assets, but of space. And it humbled him. For Amara, freedom was not dramatic. It was functional. She traveled when she wanted, worked when inspired, rested without guilt. She laughed more easily, not because she had escaped pain, but because she had processed it. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in her office, she received a message from a young woman she had mentored months earlier. "I walked away from a partnership today," the message read. "It hurt, but I remembered what you said. Thank you." Amara smiled softly. Impact did not always come with recognition. Sometimes it arrived quietly, like a seed planted in the right soil. In the evenings, she returned home to a space that felt like her own. Art she loved, books she chose, silence that felt companionable rather than empty. She did not rush to replace what she had lost. She understood now that healing was not about filling space. It was about reclaiming it. And in reclaiming it, she found joy. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that endures. The kind that does not require validation. The kind that does not fear solitude. The kind that knows its worth without needing to prove it. Amara had not risen from betrayal with vengeance. She had risen with alignment, and that alignment changed everything. Closure did not arrive with a single moment. It arrived gradually, through acceptance, through distance, through time doing what time does best, revealing what truly matters. Months after the restructuring, Darius Kalichi's life looked nothing like it once had. Not ruined, not dramatic, just recalibrated. He still went to the office, still attended meetings, still contributed to strategy and execution. But the center of gravity had shifted. Decisions were debated. Authority was shared. Oversight was no longer optional. At first, the adjustment bruised his pride. Then it reshaped him. He learned to prepare instead of dominate, to listen instead of perform, to build consensus instead of relying on deference. The irony was not lost on him. Under the very system Amara had designed, one he once dismissed as excessive, his work became more effective. But the cost of learning came late. In quiet moments, Darius reflected on what he had lost that could not be recovered. Not money, not influence, but partnership. The kind built on mutual respect rather than assumption. At home, Zainab settled into a life that was less glamorous than she had imagined, but more honest. Motherhood anchored her. It stripped away illusions quickly. She stopped measuring herself against Amara, stopped seeing her as competition. Instead, she focused on creating stability for her child. She and Darius did not build a romance out of what remained. They built responsibility. It was not the story she had envisioned, but it was the one reality allowed. One evening, as she watched her son sleep, Zainab understood something quietly powerful. Being chosen in secrecy was never a victory. Being respected openly was, and that respect had to be built, not demanded. Across the city, Amara's life unfolded with clarity. She no longer needed to prove anything. Her days were filled with purpose, not urgency. Her calendar reflected choice, not obligation. She oversaw investments that aligned with her values. She mentored leaders who asked better questions rather than louder ones. She spoke occasionally at events not about betrayal, not about triumph, but about systems that protected dignity. Power, she once said during a closed-door session, is safest when it's prepared to survive without you. The room had fallen silent. Those words carried the weight of lived experience. Amara did not look back with bitterness. She looked back with understanding. Her marriage had not ended because of another woman or a child. It had ended because imbalance went unchallenged too long, because silence was mistaken for acceptance, because trust was treated as permanence rather than something to be earned daily. She accepted her role in that lesson, and she released the rest. One afternoon, while reviewing a proposal for a women-led infrastructure fund, Amara paused at the window. The city stretched beneath her, alive, evolving, indifferent to personal history. She felt something she hadn't felt in years: completion. Not because every wound had healed, but because she no longer carried unfinished conversations inside her. Darius and Amara crossed paths one final time at a professional gathering months later. No tension, no awkwardness, just a nod. A mutual recognition of what had been and what would never be again. As they parted ways, Darius realized something quietly humbling. Amara had not walked away to punish him. She had walked away to remain whole. And that distinction changed how he viewed everything. That night, he wrote in a notebook he had started keeping, a habit born from the absence of certainty. He wrote, "Never confuse loyalty with silence. Never mistake preparation for control. And never assume someone will stay simply because they always have." Across the city, Amara closed her laptop and turned off the lights in her office. She stepped into the evening with ease. No escort, no announcement, no need for validation. She had reclaimed what mattered: not the company, not the title, but herself. And in that reclamation, the story found its ending not in revenge, not in collapse, but in quiet, undeniable truth. Sometimes walking away is not a loss. It is the moment you finally stand on ground that belongs entirely to you. True power is not loud. It does not beg, threaten, or compete for attention. This story reminds us that self-worth is built in preparation, not reaction. Amara didn't win because she shouted the loudest or fought the hardest. She won because she knew who she was long before she was tested. She understood that love without respect becomes a slow form of loss, and that silence should never cost you your dignity. Life will sometimes place you in moments where walking away feels like failure. But as we've seen, walking away can be the bravest form of self-respect. When you stop negotiating your value, you reclaim your future. And when you choose clarity over chaos, you give yourself the chance to grow into something stronger, wiser, and more whole. If this story touched you, ask yourself, Have you ever stayed quiet to keep peace and paid for it with yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories that heal, teach, and remind us of our worth, subscribe to the channel and walk this journey with us. Because your story matters too.